welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Say It Online. I am your host, Say Gabriel, and I am here to help all of you digital agency owners communicate better and more effectively in this crazy digital age. I am super stoked to welcome our guest today, who is the infamous Brent Weaver. Infamous? No, just famous, I think. Brent Weaver from uGurus. Brent has been a mentor of mine for years now, and a lot of the most amazing things at Anansi we can really trace back to his influence. So welcome, Brent.
Good to be here, and I will gladly take infamous. So we're all set there.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I could talk about you all day, but why don't you give us just your own introduction? So here's uGurus. What is it that you do? Just tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so at a high level, uGurus is a coaching and training program for digital agency owners, and we focus primarily on helping agency owners grow their business so they can achieve freedom in their business and life. And we do that through a variety of programs, everything from a 10-week boot camp focused on sales and marketing to a longer-term 1+ year program on helping you dominate your market and dominate your agency.
Awesome. That is really cool. And just to give our listeners some context, so I signed myself and Anansi up for boot camp probably well over 3 years ago now, knowing absolutely nothing about it. And since then, we've been on just a wild journey of different programs with them. But I think that will probably come up later at the end. As usual, we'll have all the awesome ways you can connect if you desire to. For now, Brent, I'm really curious. So you, like us, you actually interact, rather than running a digital agency, and I know that's where you come from, you actually interact with a lot of different digital agencies. But I'm curious, either in your own agency days or in your days currently with uGurus, what are some of the communication issues that you've really come up against?
Yeah, and this is probably could be a topic for a book or a week-long seminar, because I know communication is probably one of the areas where there's the most challenges and issues can kind of arise from. I mean, everything
Guess that
from...
means we'll have to have you back on the podcast at another time.
Well, right, because like everything from, the moment that your client hears about you, whether that's through a referral or word of mouth, or through your own website or your marketing, or you standing up at an event and telling people about who you are and who you serve. That's the moment that, communication is in play. What you say in that very first interaction with your client, even before they're a customer, might dictate whether they become a customer or not. It might dictate how much you get paid as a service provider, right? And then once you're in that kind of, more hand-to-hand combat sales process, right? There's a lot of communication going on there about like trying to get people to commit to discovery and getting them through proposal presentations. I just did a session for our new bootcamp program, actually, specifically all on the proposal presentation. So I just literally talked for 90 minutes about communication around that one meeting. And so communication as a service provider is huge, right? I think we probably interact
no pressure then, right?
Yeah, no pressure. Don't screw this up, right? But yeah, I mean, everything from the language and words you use to just basic structure of conversations. Are you clear on the agenda and the purpose of the meetings that you have with your clients? Are they clear on those things? Are there expectations being set? Are you creating plenty of space so that you can make sure that you tell your client what's going on, but also provide space for feedback? Are you capturing that communication someplace to make sure that you actually do what you say you're going to do? I mean, there's all those kinds of things and everything in between. So communication is definitely a very broad, big topic. And I'm really excited that you are tackling this for this market with your podcast.
Awesome. Well, I know we will be able to have episodes almost infinitely then about it. But I'm curious. So is there an area, in your perspective, seeing digital agency owners at all kind of different stages, is there an area, let's say maybe just like sales or marketing or in, like meetings, is there an area where you see most often that people kind of struggle or have a communication breakdown?
Well, we kind of think of agencies, our model that we teach to, there's kind of three buckets or components or pillars, if you will, the attract leg, the win leg, and the delight leg. So we look at your agency and say, okay, look, there's these three major areas: how you attract your prospects and leads and clients, how you win them into customers and clients, and how you deliver and delight. So I think if you were to look at each one of those areas and think about communication, right? There's plenty of examples of where things can go swimmingly well because you're communicating well and you're, setting expectations and you're clear and you're using the language and, the things that your clients care most about. And then there's also plenty of examples where that can go really, really bad. Like I was just working with a client and, they were in the middle of a proposal negotiation, and the client emailed back some basic questions. And for some reason, the agency, I think, thought that there was, more negative tension than maybe there was, right? And so there was like, over email, for example, right? Like we know there's, unless you're using like heavily use of emoticons or whatever, or animated GIFs, like it's really hard to get that context over email, right? So they got these like 4 questions and their response might not have been what I would have responded with, right? And I don't think it helped to further their opportunity. So, knowing like what medium, for example, to communicate about certain things. Like I'm a big fan when you get into the sales process to really focus on conversations, like meetings where you can kind of read people. You can like, get a little bit of their body language if you're in person or on a video call, or you can kind of hear the tone of their voice, see if they're understanding you. Like you can pick up a lot of stuff there. So, I think all 3 of those areas, attract, win, and delight, I think all of them have equal opportunity for success and also failure.
So what I'm hearing is that the way that we apply different communication practices, number one, shifts according to where in the cycle you are with a client. So I'm hearing, that attract, win. Was it attract, win, delight? Was that?
Yep.
Yeah. So, attract, which is the marketing stage, you mentioned how there are considerations like what medium are you using? Are you engaging with people in a medium where you can actually kind of read and respond to their body language? And that might look different in kind of the win versus the delight. Now, one thing I remember you talking about recently in some of the, many pieces of value and bits of content that you share with the community is this idea of there being kind of a gap in perception that potentially affects how we communicate. And I forget exactly what you called this, but you called it, I think, kind of the client expert gap or something like that. Was that correct?
Client expert gap, expert client gap. I mean, essentially what we're talking about is, like say like you're an expert when it comes to content. That's why people hire you, because you are an authority when it comes to content and your agency knows content 360 degrees. You guys know how to organize it, know how to write great content that converts and all that kind of stuff. If a client knew how to do that or had the resources to do that, they wouldn't be hiring you. And so what I see happen a lot is that people forget that they're an expert and they know a lot about a certain topic and their clients don't know anything about that, right? And so even looking at something like your marketing material or your proposals, I go to people's websites where they're communicating about their services as if their client is an expert at those services. Like they'll use kind of business speak terms that are very much only really, terms that people that are experts in that, like, know about, right? For example, like the other day I was looking at this like CRO, conversion rate optimization, right? That's like a very like, digital marketer term. Very specific, right? And like, that's cool if like if your agency is known for CRO, but you have to think about like the marketplace, right? So like if there are people that know what CRO is and they are searching for it, that'd be great for them to find you. But something tells me the amount of people that actually could leverage the expertise of somebody that is doing CRO is probably much greater than the amount of people that are actually experts at CRO or even know what CRO is. And so if I go to an agency's website that's a conversion rate optimization specialist, and all they're talking about is CRO, leftwards and right, that's all they're talking about, right? Then they're missing out on a huge opportunity in the marketplace, because there are lots and lots of problems that, have nothing to do with CRO, but CRO is a great solution for. And I think if people speak more at the level that their clients at, they're going to find that they're going to have a lot more success versus just talking about what they're super comfortable with, which is their specialty or their expertise, all day long.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and this is something that we are at Anansi are like huge fans of, doesn't even like, we actively push for this, is that you might be an expert on a topic and people are hiring you because you're an expert on a topic, but it's still important to bridge that gap and meet, your clients, or in this case, your prospects, in terms of where they're at. And if I'm understanding that correctly, that means translating the kind of more technical terms or the specialized explanations for what you do into terms that are actually really practical for the person who's actually reading it. And I'm hearing that is sitting within kind of the attract stage of pay attention to that in your marketing materials, for example.
Yeah, I think it can happen at, that particular, so the client to expert gap can definitely affect all parts of your business.
So can you give maybe just a high level example of how that might affect things at the win or delight stage?
Yeah. So I'll start with attract. So attract would be, let's take this CRO agency that's, kind of make believe or whatever. They might be trying to reach e-commerce stores that aren't happy with their sales, right? They might have a product that they thought was going to be super successful, and they're not sure if it's the product's fault or if it's something that's going on with their website, right? Is something that's happening in their buying process on their site affecting their sales? And so, you have to think about the types of Google searches, or, what are they going to be asking their friends about? What are they going to be saying, like, hey, to their entrepreneur buddies, like, hey, we launched this product, but it's just not successful. Like, we don't understand because we think it should be successful, and so that might be a problem area that CRO could be a great fit for. So they have to really think about what's going on in their customers' minds. So that's kind of an attract example. A win example, I see this all the time with clients when they present, or, they email their client their proposal. And there's lots of terms and tools and technologies and methodologies that really our clients know nothing about. And we shouldn't make the assumption that they know anything about. So if you're presenting a proposal to a client and you've got all this stuff that you're jamming in there as part of your solution, but your client doesn't actually understand, like, why am I buying this? Like, why do I need, Google Analytics, right? Why am I, paying for somebody to do a sitemap or a wireframe, or why do I need to have somebody, do a mobile responsive, design or whatever? I mean, there's so many terms. Like, you can look at any agency provider's proposal, and you could probably go through there with a red highlighter and just think, okay, if my client's not an expert, what terms could I highlight that they may or may not have any idea what they mean? And you'd probably be surprised. Most proposals might end up looking like about half of the content is stuff that the client has no idea. So think about that from the sales perspective. Like, if you've got 50% of your content in a proposal is stuff that your client doesn't actually, there's a chance they might know little to nothing about that topic, or worse, they're actually misinformed. They actually they think they know, about WordPress, for example, but they don't actually know about WordPress, right? They think they have some assumptions, they have some things that they believe about WordPress that are not actually true, right? So that's an example where, that would happen, right? In the delight stage, right? So we're doing fulfillment, we're delivering and delighting. We see all this stuff happen a lot, right? Well, somebody will be like, oh, well, we're going to have a weekly stand-up. Right. So in the web space and in this kind of entrepreneur nook, right, a lot of us, because we work virtually, we do, daily or weekly stand-ups. And so just that term of a weekly stand-up might feel super comfortable to us. For a lot of small business owners or corporate or whatever, they might not actually have any idea what you mean when you say weekly stand-up, right? And that's just you trying to communicate to your client that we're going to have a weekly meeting that's going to be short and it's always going to follow the same agenda, right? That's what we're actually saying when we say weekly stand-up. But somebody from a project management team could be like, hey, by the way, you're late for your weekly stand-up. And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, what's a weekly, and obviously that's not super likely to happen, but you can look in your fulfillment stage, like tools like Basecamp and Asana and Trello and all these things that we as professionals are super comfortable with. All of a sudden we throw our clients into them and we're like, hey, cool. Like, please add all of your to-dos and task lists inside of this, this little web thing, right? And we used to work with a lot of restaurants at our agency, and that just everything would break down at that moment because the chefs or whatever that we were working with, they just weren't sitting on their computers. Like, we had to operate through SMS with those clients.
No, and that so like the overarching theme that I'm really hearing here, and there's been lots of gold nuggets, as you would say, is really what I'm hearing is meeting people where they're at. I think there's a lot of temptation to add these kind of super specialized systems or super specialized terms. But what I'm hearing from you, even just taking that delight example, which is that if you're working, yes, it breaks down to kind of the jargon and the terms that you're using. But for example, if you're working with a bunch of people at restaurants who are not super tech friendly and you're putting a lot of pressure on them to operate a very technical system, then it sounds to me like, identifying those situations and accounting for them or being accommodating for them kind of takes communication just out of the words that you say and into the kind of the whole dynamic of your relationship. That's kind of, maybe I don't know if I'm reaching a little bit there, but
I think you hit it with, trying to meet people where they're at, and, really thinking about, their experience level when you're talking to them about stuff with your business. Everything from, standing up in a room and telling people what you do. Like, will other people who could potentially introduce you to ideal clients understand what you say you do well enough to identify people in their network? One of the things that we try to, I just did this at our in-person intensive. We had everybody work on two things. One was their agency promise, the thing that they're going to tell people in a room that they do, that know nothing about them. What's their core promise statement that they would, the results, the solution that they provide at a very, very high level as an agency. And the other thing that we helped them with was a high level concept. So just a really simple thing to help people that don't really know much about what you do to understand it, right? So like one of the things that I'll tell people as a high level concept, I'll say like, yeah, we run a business coaching program for web designers, right? At a very basic level, most people understand what business coaching is. Most people understand what web designers are. Yeah, it's kind of commoditizing what I'm saying, but at a high level concept, it gives somebody kind of a simple idea to hold space for what we do, right? If I actually explain to them what I did in my very, my marketing style intro from this podcast, right? They might not know who to introduce me to. Whereas if I say, hey, we do business coaching for web designers and people that do digital marketing, they might go, do I know any web designers or digital marketers? Like, actually, I think I do. Like, maybe I could introduce you, right? I mean, that's what you're really looking for when you communicate about your business, right? There's always a purpose behind it. It's not for you, right? To feel good about like this amazing thing you've accomplished. It's to help you get more awareness and hopefully get more clients that are ideal fits.
And then, of course, I don't know if ironically is the right term, but through that process, at least I found that you do end up building a lot more of that confidence by not necessarily focusing on that, but focusing on, what am I trying to get out of this interaction? Not like, what am I trying to milk this interaction for, but what is the goal here? What is the purpose, right? Are you introducing yourself, not just for the sake of introducing yourself? What I'm hearing from you is that you want to be able to, in this context, introduce yourself in a way that easy for them to understand at a high level what you do. Now, I'm curious because we've talked about a lot of these things kind of more at this conceptual high level. You just talked about, how you went through this process with a group of people in person. I'm curious, how has your perspective around communication changed? How has the way that you communicate within uGurus and within the business affected your success as a business?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples I could pull from here. I think, one of the things that I've been an entrepreneur now for 20 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. And not necessarily crazy for our audience, more crazy for me to be like, wow, I've been doing this for a while, right? It wasn't just yesterday. But I think something that I am constantly surprised about is how many assumptions that we make in the process of communicating something that, if we're like, we recently did some changes to our kind of overall program structure. And some of those things went really well. Some of those things didn't go very well in terms of just the rollout process. And sometimes we make assumptions that, okay, if I put this little bit of important text into an email and send that out to everybody that I think should know about it. They're all going to read the email and they're going to understand it exactly as it is in my head, right? And sometimes that works just fine. Sometimes it doesn't work. The first time I came across this that was like a big aha was I started using one of those proposal tools like way back in the day. And one of the things that the proposal tool allowed me to do was I could kind of send the e-proposal and it would tell me how long people spent on various different pages. And up until that point, I'd never quote unquote presented a proposal. And so I emailed this proposal through this really cool tool over to somebody. And I saw that, after about a week, I went in and logged in and they had spent almost zero time on the entire document, except they spent a minute on the pricing page. And then that was it. They spent probably less than 2 minutes entirely in the document. And then 1 minute of that was spent on the page that had probably the least amount of actual content on it. It was just like the price and the timeline,
put the least
right?
work into.
Yeah, it was just like, and it was like this light bulb went off. I was like, oh my gosh. Like the assumption that I had always made with every proposal that I'd ever emailed was that people read them and that they read them like I read, Steinbeck, right? With like a cup of tea and like the light just right. And I'm sitting back in my chair and I'm like enjoying this book and it's the only thing that's on my mind, right?
That's
and I was
kind
like,
of how I read proposals. I don't know.
Okay, well, I actually don't, right? So like I know from my own habits, right? It's like we can probably understand a lot about our clients by just seeing how we do things. It's like we don't read the marketing emails letter for letter, right? It's like we scan them and for the most part, maybe we look at the headlines and we archive, right? And so I think this is a powerful lesson when it comes to communicating. And I feel like I know this and I'm constantly reminded about this, but it still sneaks up on you, is that you just can't make assumptions about when it comes to communicating. And that's throughout your process, especially when you're talking about changes, right? If you're changing how your agency does business, if you're changing the components of how you deliver your service, right? Especially if it's for clients or projects that you're currently working with, right? Because you want to improve how things are happening. You probably don't ever want to make too many assumptions. You want to repeat a lot with what you're saying. And there's times where, even for us during this change rollout, where we'll continue to repeat stuff. And then I get on a call with a customer and they're like, hey, how does this work again? And I'm like, hey, did you see that one email we sent? And then oh, you know what? I haven't really looked at any of the emails for a while. And then you're like, okay, cool. So, and I'm not upset about that. It just is what it is. And then that's just an opportunity to help, again, back to that client expert gap, right? We can help then bring them up to our level and go, okay, cool. Here's the things that we changed. Here's the things that we rolled out. Here's how things work now. This is, let me try to make this as clear as possible and then set up any expectations for follow-up to make sure that you're 100% clear. And usually once you've had those conversations, things move a lot more clearly, but it's just like, it's hard, especially in this day and age where you have all these great tools to communicate one to many. You've got, mass email, you've got messenger bots, you've got email ticketing and support systems, you've got video emails, you've got all of these amazing tools, but no matter how much time you put into that content, if your listener, if your person on your email list, if your client doesn't actually read the material, then you're kind of still at square one, right? And that can cause problems. It can cause problems for you, it can cause problems for them. At the end of the day, their experience is what really matters the most, right? If they feel like they're not getting what they want, then they'll either, refund, cancel, or not recommend you to other people, which is what you want, right?
So really and I think that this is really important, what you're talking about, this idea of assumptions and, to, if nothing else, be aware of the assumptions that you're making or try to. I'm hearing this is kind of tying back to what you were initially talking about in terms of communicating, which is that as the person who is communicating, who has all of the information, it can be very easy to assume and understand that the other people who need to be aware of the information are on top of it or tuned into the same level. But what I'm hearing from you is that even if you have sent out communications, or even if you have kind of like made that effort, it's really important to check in and to not just make the assumption that it was absorbed as specifically and as painstakingly as it was communicated. And what are some of the things that you've done or learned over time to account for those assumptions or to recorrect from those assumptions?
I think, probably one of the quotes that I've heard that I think resonates well with me is people normally have to hear something 7 times before they hear it the first time. So I think probably one of the best things that I have done just mentally is go into things like this with the expectation that it's going to take a little while. It's going to take some time before people are all on the same page and that they fully understand like what you're doing. And I think that goes for, marketing your message. Like we can send an email to our list from a marketing perspective and assume that everybody opened it. This is something that we do at uGurus every once in a while is we'll just resend an email that we sent, 3 or 4 months ago, just because we've made the assumption that, even though we sent it to our entire list, there's a good chance that most of the people never even saw the subject line. Like 50% or more never saw the subject line. Usually these days, 15, 20% open rates is pretty solid. So when you think about that, that's 80% of your audience or 85% did not open the message. So the question is did they, of course, 85% also did not, they all didn't read your subject line. Right. So they had 50 emails that day, or maybe they didn't even check their email that day and you're in the promotions folder and now you're on page 2 and they're never going to see your email at all. Right. So I think just being okay with repeating your message and, I think doing that until somebody says, hey, I think you've kind of communicated this message to me enough. One of the things we do at uGurus is I always have a quarterly core values kind of speech that I make to my team. So we have our 5 core values, and every quarter, I basically create a story around those values and I repeat it. So I've got members that have been on my team now for close to like 4 years. And, I'm still saying the same quarterly values like every 90 days. And like, it never fails. Like, it's like, oh yeah, that's what that means. That's how I live that value. Right. So sometimes I feel like I think people more often than not under communicate. I think it's pretty rare that you find somebody that over communicate. So I think all of us could probably move the needle a little bit and kind of leverage that idea of repetition of message for everything that we're doing, from marketing through sales and also through client service.
So this is really, really interesting. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard this idea, that you need to hear something 7 times before you really hear it for the first time. Certainly I've lived that in certain circumstances. But one of the pieces of feedback that we get just at Anansi as a business over and over again is that agencies are concerned about that repetition, or they're concerned about a certain degree of repetition. Maybe it's not the exact same type of repetition. They're concerned about potentially being asked similar questions over again, or they're concerned about a part of the process being similar to a previous part of the process. Like, this is actually literally one of the number one concerns that we hear again and again. So I find this very interesting because what I'm hearing from you is that, you say it can be hard to over repeat. So then where do you think some of this fear is coming from? Is it coming from that assumption that the client is listening? Is it really just a misplaced fear? Or what sort of thoughts do you have on that kind of fear of repetition?
All right. So can you elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned that agencies approach you with your process being repetitive, i.e. because you guys are offering services to agencies' clients, so that you're taking the client through the same process on a repetitive timeline, or how does that?
Yeah. Let me just articulate that a little bit better. So we hear the fear of repetition, I would say, in a few different places. So many of our partners go through some sort of discovery-like process, which is essentially a series of meetings to create some sort of initial roadmap or strategy before committing to the production part of a project. And then, of course, we are coming in and we do have a content process. But one of the things that I hear is they're afraid, first of all, in that initial kind of discovery or strategy process, that there will be too much repetition for their clients. So they're afraid that either a question will get asked over again, or that a part of the process will feel similar, or that the client will be hearing something over and over again. Like, they'll hear kind of the next steps or the value of something presented too many times. But I'm wondering whether some of this is potentially rooted in, because personally, we've never heard that kind of negative feedback from the clients, mostly just in the partner.
So this is a slam dunk for your listeners. Okay. So this always comes down to what a term I call framing, which is how you frame what you're doing with your clients and with your partners. And so I think that if your clients aren't pre-framed, that part of this process might feel repetitive, and that there's pros and cons to, different processes. And, we would much rather see everybody, because there's lots of moving parts with a digital project. So this assumption that a client can make that I'm going to say something about my business once, and this entire cohort of people that are working on my account are all going to fully understand that from 360 degrees. I think that's really, really dangerous ultimately for the client, right? To be in that mindset of thinking that if I've said this once, like I already answered this question on my survey, didn't you guys read that, right? Like framing ahead of time to say, hey, during our discovery process, we've got a lot of moving parts. We've got a lot of people that are on this project. We create project briefs, do surveys. We have a lot of meetings. Sometimes we have maybe new people that are in the meetings, and they're going to do their best to get up to speed on a project. But one of the things that we encourage is for people to ask the questions that are on their mind to make sure that they're clear. Because ultimately what we want here, all of us here together want to have a successful project. We want to have a successful project and a project launch. We want to stay on time, on budget. We want to hit our milestones. We want to get you the outcome that you want as a client. And so one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to shortchange the discovery process. We also don't want to shortchange any of the stakeholders or team members that are a part of our company to make sure that they're 100% clear. Because the last thing that you guys want is we're about to launch your website and you look at something and you're like, that's not right. And the way that we avoid that is by having great communication throughout our process, even if sometimes it feels like that communication is somewhat repetitive. And I know this from personal experience, because I'm literally onboarding a new ad agency right now. And, I know better than to think that I can say something once and never have to say it again. So I actually invite repetition into the process with the agency, with their onboarding process, with their team members. And basically, when we did our onboarding meeting with them, I said, hey, look, I'm going to literally probably repeat everything that I put in my onboarding survey, because I'm going to probably say it maybe a little bit differently and maybe help you see this from a different angle. Or I will reinforce something that maybe doesn't seem as important in the onboarding survey, but when you hear me kind of reemphasize it in our live meeting today, or in a future meeting, you'll kind of key in that that's really important to me, right? So I think that framing this to your clients and to your partners and helping everybody to be okay with repetition, I think ultimately will help you overcome this.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from here is that repetition, or some of the kind of potential concerns or dangers around repetition, come from an improper framing. And what I'm hearing and understanding the word framing to mean, just for our listeners who may not understand it, is giving context to a particular approach or situation or something that you're saying, maybe some symbolism, so that they understand, well, okay, now I'm going to sound funny. You're giving them context so they can understand the context. But essentially, you are giving them context so that they can understand the value of why you're making certain choices, instead of leaving them to potentially linger in confusion. So when you're embracing the repetition in your process, you're not just kind of leaving it up to them. You are framing it and helping them understand that, we are going to be potentially repeating some things, like some parts of the process, or repeating some questions, or et cetera, so that we can make this the most successful project ever, not because, we don't respect your intelligence or we want to waste your time or something. Obviously,
Exactly. So if you don't set the frame, they will, right? And so normally in our lives, like if I was sitting at a dinner table with my spouse and I just kept asking her the same question over and over, she would probably get annoyed with me, right? And she'd probably be like, if I asked her a question like, hey, how's your day, honey? And then she tells me about her day. And then 5 minutes later, I say, hey, how was your day today, right? Obviously, it's clear I'm maybe not paying attention. And, the natural response is that, she might be annoyed, right? The frame for her, the general frame is he's not listening, right? And that means that the resulting emotion for her in that case, and I'm not saying that I've ever done this before. I'm just kidding. I have lots of times, I'm sure, as everybody has. But, the frame is kind of the natural frame of he's not listening. And so the result is I'm annoyed, right? So if we control the frame and we say, hey, look, during the discovery process, there might be times where it seems like we're repeating the same questions, or different people are kind of asking the same questions, or kind of digging into similar stuff. That's actually a good thing, right? Because at the end of the day, the frame is results, right? It's us getting you results. And we know that part of the process is for us to 100% understand what is, what you're trying to achieve, what your problems and issues are, what are your frustrations and roadblocks, what are your wants and aspirations and desires and all that kind of stuff, right? And those are very complex things, right? And there's a lot of nuance to that, and so I think it's okay to create that frame for our clients and say, hey, look, this is going to be just part of our process. And that'll help go a long way, because then when they hear repetition come up, or they, hear you asking the same thing again, you have more ability to kind of throw in a joke, or, kind of like, oh yeah, hey, remember our team member, is going to ask some questions. And if she asks a question that's super, that you guys have already answered before, we can kind of poke fun at that. Like, oh, hey, we had just gone through this on our last call, but it's okay. Cindy wasn't here and she wants to hear it from her own ears. Right. Because we value everybody being on the same page. Right. So that's a way that you can kind of tie it in, make it a little bit more fun, if that's a big problem for you.
Yeah. No, I'm really, really loving this. This is truly gold. This is something that these are all concepts that I think are really, really, really crucial and quintessential for us at Anansi that maybe we haven't put into those terms. So it's really, really valuable to hear you give that frame to the decisions we make and why we do it. And something else that you said that was a few minutes ago now, but I didn't want to let it get too lost. That was also around the power of repetition and communication, which is that you said, one of the things that when you're onboarding this new ad agency is you let them know that your own repetition was a sign that there was something important or valuable there. And I'm kind of hearing lately, so far we've been talking about this in the context of, repeating parts of the process or making sure that the client feels okay. But I'm also hearing from you that maybe there's some value in identifying where your clients repeat themselves as something that is important that they want you to convey, even if they're not necessarily conscious of it. Was I understanding that accurately?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, if you have a client that, let's say they have 10 products, and let's say 2 of those products are their most profitable products, and they want 2 of those products to be the most featured, the most pushed, and the most important. So this was a perfect example for us as we were talking about our product line, and the agency was, zeroing in on, some of our like lower cost products. And we're talking about how we could create some, kind of make our company more accessible by featuring these things. And, I was kind of having to repeat myself, but saying, hey, look, I'm really excited to have that a part of our overall portfolio. And definitely we can make that a part of this strategy. And if that's what's going to get us the best results, I'm all there. But as I've said before, our main focus of this project and of this investment is to promote this and this product over here. Right. And that's probably something that on this call in particular, I had said, probably a dozen times, and I was unapologetic about it, right? Like, hey, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that this investment is all about this thing over here, right? Just want to bring us back and make sure that we're all, yep, cool, everybody's aligned around that. Yep, we get it. We just want to see how we can use this thing over here to promote that, right? So if you have a client, for example, who has said that once, but not a lot, and then you end up launching their website and they have a products page and they have 10 products on there and they're listed alphabetically and the most profitable products are below the fold, like, whose fault is that, right? Is it the agency's fault or is it the client's fault because they just simply didn't reinforce how important those things were? They might have said it in passing, but maybe everybody didn't hear it, right? Maybe everybody didn't know that that's really what this whole thing was about. And so I think as clients, you do need to kind of lean in and be okay with saying something over and over again, especially when you're talking about multi-stakeholder projects. Something that we could probably talk about on another podcast. But, if you guys ever played the telephone game in kindergarten, I think maybe that was introduced. I don't know. I know you're from Canada. Do they play the telephone game in preschool in Canada?
Oh, yeah, the telephone game. I'm happy to hear that they play it in Denver, too, because I was recently referencing this on a call with somebody else.
Yeah. So, this comes down to if you were to literally draw some nodes on a piece of paper, right? This is an interesting thing just to think of conceptually, right? So you've got 2 people involved in a project or a situation, right? You have one communication channel, basically pathway in that space, right? So say if it's just you and me, we're on this podcast, I can say something and you can hear it and then you can respond, right? There's a very easy serve and return thing and it's done in real time, right? There's 2 people. You add just one more node, right? You add a third person and all of a sudden we get a triangle, right? Which means that we don't just double our communication channels, we actually triple them. We go from 1 channel to 3 channels. Okay. And so this problem kind of happens, and it gets more and more compounded the more nodes that you have basically on the network. So if you basically go from having just you and me working on a project, say, to now it's me, you, plus your integrator, Celine, all of a sudden now there's 3 times as many different communication channels. I can tell you something. You can tell Celine something. Celine can then tell me something back, and then I can tell you something back, right? So it's like that path of conversation, just like telephone when we were in preschool, right? What happens in that game, right? Somebody says, I love elephants. And what you get is, I ate kitty food for breakfast, right? Like it goes around the horn and we just get something totally different. And that's what happens a lot of times in these types of scenarios is, you're onboarding a client, for example, and they have one stakeholder that's quote unquote in charge of the project. And so everybody in their organization, which could be 2 people, could be 10 people, could be 30 people, are trying to channel communication through that one point of contact and then to you. So when you think about that, that creates a lot of risk for things to be misunderstood in the project. And that's really what it comes down to, is just risk. And the more times that we hear something, the more opportunities we have to lower the risk that mistakes are going to happen or there's inconsistencies in our communication.
And how do you deal with that? I thought that was just absolutely gold. That idea that when you add a third person, communications do not double, they triple. And that's one of those things that is like hitting really close to home for me right now. But, especially when you have that kind of many to one dynamic where you have a whole bunch of people who are trying to channel information through one person, and you're trying to satisfy that one person for the success of the whole project. I mean, I'm sure this could be a whole other hour of talking, but are there some things that you have kind of observed over time, either that are kind of huge pitfalls to be avoided or things that have really helped you with that problematic situation that we've all been in many times?
I mean, I think that a couple of really big ones, and I think as you get into larger organizations, you see more and more of this, which is, getting stuff written down, right, is really important. If you take a message and you write it down on paper and you pass it around a circle, it's going to be the same, from point A all the way around the circle, right? So having as much written down, I think, as possible throughout your process. And if you can't write it down, then I think using platforms where you can record and you can transcribe, or then you can move that into a written form of communication to make sure that, people are on the same page, right? That we have a written outcomes and expectations, that we have, written goals and objectives for the projects. We have written requirements. We actually were just working with a content team, and the first run of content that we got from them on a project that was not good. This was not your content team, different content team. It wasn't what we wanted, right? And so I could have had a call and walked through that verbally, which would have been the easiest for me. But it was I knew that providing them kind of written guidelines on hey, here are the 10 things that I saw in these articles that we just want to make sure you guys never make this mistake twice. And here they are. They're written down. You guys can, everybody on your team can see those. They can understand in the same way. And then also going multi-channel, right? So you could write something down and then you could also create a video kind of review of that. So it's written down in the official text, and then you're, recording a video to kind of talk through it in your own words. That can sometimes help as well. So I think that the more stuff that you can put in concrete documentation, it's a pain in the butt. I hate documentation. I hate writing stuff down in this fashion, but I find that when I do it, and I do it without emotion, I do it with just a very objective lens of what am I really trying to accomplish here, and try to kind of wordsmith that into really specific things that other people can understand. Usually I get better results from everybody that's involved.
I like that. Really having of course I like that. We love writing everything down as much as possible, but having that kind of third party reference. And, what I'm hearing is that even if writing is not a particular skill of yours, or even if you find this painful, for one, it sounds like the value that you get out of it in the case of an issue or in providing issues is worth it. But it also sounds like, in our technological day and age, there are other alternatives that you can leverage, like a recording or a transcription or things like that, which I know that we have encountered many partners who use that to great advantage. So they don't necessarily need to be focused on writing everything down at once. And, I've seen other people with action items, just having kind of a little table that they put action items into, being super, super successful. I mean, I have many more questions and could continue to ask you those questions indefinitely, but I'm very grateful for the time that you've already given us so far, and we are reaching that winding down moment. So before, you give us all the fun and awesome details about how to contact you, I just love to hear, what is something that is either exciting for you right now about uGurus, maybe that has shifted around your communication styles, or just in general that looking towards the future that you feel super excited about wanting to share with our listeners?
Oh gosh, I'm excited about a lot of stuff. I think, speaking of communication, so we actually just did a 1-day in-person intensive. It was kind of a 1-day workshop. So that was a very different style of delivery than we'd ever done. I'm not going to lie. I totally freaked out for the 2 weeks prior to us having to deliver it, and put a lot of hours into making that happen. But it was just really cool for us because we've mostly led workshops online. We also have a big annual event at uSummit where we bring a couple hundred agency owners together for a couple of days of learning and collaboration. But we'd never done something that was like so kind of intimate and close. And, usually with our big annual event, like we have like the music and there's like some lights and like I got to take the stage and there's a guy that introduces me and there's like, it's just like there's this energy. Whereas in the intensive, it was like totally different. It was like me in a room, horseshoe of desks around me. And it was like, okay, let's get started, right? It was just a totally different platform. And we had so much fun. And it was like so cool just to be there and like get work done on our businesses together and seeing people like have a transformation in as little as 1 day. It was just so rewarding. So I think if I was, I'm excited about a lot of stuff right now, but that for me was kind of new and shiny. It was definitely difficult, but it was kind of new and different for me in the business. So I'm very, very excited about exploring that platform further for uGurus for sure.
Small live platform. Cue another half a dozen questions about how things shifted from like the big event to the small event and delivering small events live versus, I could get into it, but I do want to respect your time here. So maybe we'll just have to have you back on the podcast at some point in the future. For now, why don't you let the audience know if they want to find out more about you, more about these awesome in-person intensives, more about any of this stuff. Can you let them know where they can find you online and where to check out anything you might have?
Yeah, sure. uGurus.com. That's uGurus.com. You can find lots of free resources on our website. We've got all sorts of cool downloads. We've got a great active blog and podcast. If you guys want to shoot me an email, Brent@uGurus.com. I've got a couple of free courses that I can happy to give you, stuff that we charge money for on our website, like our web design sales kit and another course that if you guys are interested in that as loyal listeners to Say's program, I'd be happy to give those away to you for free. And if we want to set up a call to chat and see how we can help you, love to do that as well.
Excellent. I cannot recommend the web design sales kit enough. That was my first touch with uGurus, what feels like many, many years ago. And the interaction model is still at the basis of what we teach everyone we bring onto our team, not just for sales, but just in general for successful projects. So with that little teaser, I'll let you guys just all rush to your inboxes to pepper Brent with messages. But other than that, Brent, it's been absolutely lovely having you here on the show. Lots of good insight there. Really, really appreciate your time and hope to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Say.
All right. To all of our listeners, this has been another awesome episode of Say It Online. I hope that you have an excellent rest of your day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.